problems. Kita niyo na po ba sa GC? Have you secured your copy? No, it would be like this. No, you can always make use of your cell phone to read problem once in a while, but it is advisable that you would have a hard copy of the problem so that when we try to formulate and solve, you may have a ready reference. But of course, nothing is wrong if you are technology savvy and you do not wish to come up with the hard copy, because for you it is a waste of paper, then so be it. Basta lang po, kaya nyo siyang sundan ng nasa cellphone lang ang problem. Hindi lang. Kailangan ko pala ng... Sige po, I am giving you 5 minutes to read the problems. So if these are formulation problems, and if we get to see 3 or more decision variables, then it would be left out as a formulation problem, meaning we would not be solving the same. Because if we would be solving so many variables, and even if we make use of the simplex method for us to be able to solve 2 or more decision variables, then it will take so much of the time. So usually po, pag maraming variables, we make use of a canned computer software to solve the problems for us. But it is important that we work on the formulation, because there is nothing correct to expect if you have formulated the problem incorrectly. Kasi kahit anong applications, kahit anong software, kahit anong program, these are all dependent on the inputs we would have. So pag nag-input ka ng maling problem, di mali din yung solution. We cannot expect a good solution from a wrongly formulated problem. So even if we have access to software that would solve the problems for us, it is very important that an IE knows how to formulate the problem that is translating worded problems or textual problems in text forms into each mathematical equivalent or inequality. So basahin po muna ang problem so that magamay ninyo ano ba yung hinihingi ng problem. So it is important now that you have scratch papers. Tapos try ninyo. Natapos ba tayo dun sa last meeting, yung sample? Kaso hindi ko ata na-send sa GC, no? Yung kopya ng PowerPoint. Hindi po. Kung na-recall nyo lang, bigyan ko lang kayong 5 minutes to read habang gino-join ko yung aking iPad. Mag-join ako ng iPad kasi nahirapan ako dito sa computer gamitin yung kanyang pang-draw. Dali lang. Join. Ano bang tawag dyan? Kalimutan ko na. Zoom. Bakit wala ang Zoom dito? Ano nangyari? Bakit wala ang Zoom? Wala dito ang Zoom. Zoom. Ang code. Kailangan mag-join lang ako ng iPad. I-echo. 849 8232 3217 691 694. Ay, patay. Hindi nakakonect sa internet. Hindi lang, papaayos ko lang. Connect, internet, Wi-Fi. ID. Connect na ba tayo?
Recording in progress.
Naririnig po?
Yes po.
So, hindi siya nag-e-echo. Dalawa. Ay, hirap kasi gamitin ng laptop. So, we start now with, ano ba ang pinakamadali dito? Kunin natin ang number 3. I think this is the easiest. So, let us start with the easiest. So, 3. A farmer has 40 hectares of farm on which to plant rice and corn. The rice needs 4 units of insecticide and 2 units of fertilizer per hectare, while corn requires 3 units of insecticide and 6 units of fertilizer. He has at least 90 units of insecticide and at least 120 units of fertilizer available. His average profit per hectare on rice is 1,500 and 1,000 on corn.
The question is, how many hectares of each crop should he plant to maximize his average profit? So I'll be using the whiteboard. Tatanggal kasi. Mayroong charge ang aking stylus. So let me share my screen. Shall be working with the whiteboard. So nakikita na po ang whiteboard. So since the objective of the problems is that they must be correctly formulated so that even if we will make use of the manual way of solving, or we would input the same to a computer program or to a computer software, it may be solved correctly. Now, we have learned from the last session that for us to be able to come up with a mathematical model, we have defined three components. One is the definition of the decision variables, which states what is that variable representing the unknown you would like to have answers with. So that is the decision variables. And normally the decision variables is represented or is introduced by the word let. So if we are asked to determine what is it that we would like to have answers with as far as problem 3 is concerned, then you have, in most of the cases, you have to look into the last statement. In most of the cases, dun mo siya makikita. So sa part na ito, mababasa mo siya as how many hectares of each crop should he plant to maximize his average profit. So therefore, we would say that we would make use of the variable x and y to represent the unknown, since we are considering here planting rice or planting corn. So it does not matter whether you make use of let x to represent the hectares on which we would be planting rice, or the farmer would be planting rice, or y would represent the hectares on which corn will be planted. But of course, it is not incorrect to make use of r to represent rice and c to represent corn. In fact, it does not matter whether you make use of a, b, c, or any other letter to represent the unknown, for as long as you understand para saan siya. No? But we normally would make use of x and y because if, for instance, we would make use of the graphical method for solving, we know that we do have the x and the y axis. Kaya po laging x. So sometimes x1, x2, pwede naman siya. So if we would have let x be equivalent to, babalikan mo po yung problem. Kung ano yung unang binanggit, it is advisable na yun ang unang mong ilalagay as the first variable. So in here, plant ang unang niyang itatanim ay rice kasi to plant rice and corn. So we would have dun sa last paragraph hectares. So hindi po pwedeng walang unit. Hectares of land to plant rice. Then we would have y. This is the same hectares of land to plant corn. Yun po siya. Important is your definition of the units. Ito hectares. Kasi yes.
Excuse po. Last time po, ma'am, ano po, wala po tayong discussion tapos orientation pa lang po yung na-discuss niyo po sa amin.
Ay, hindi pa tayo nakadiscuss?
Wala po, ma'am, kasi wala pong pasok last week po. Suspended po yung klase.
Ay, aray ko. Ang natandaan ko yung isang section yun.
Opo, baka po sa AM po, ma'am.
Ay, patay. Ba't kanina binigay ko sa inyo, hindi mo lang kayo nag-message sa akin, naman hindi pa tayo dyan.
Ma'am, may nag-chat po sa Zoom, baka hindi niyo po na pati po sa
Ay.
GC.
Meron ba?
Apo. Thank you po.
Sus Mariosep. Nasa problem solving na, wala pang discussion. Ala, saan? Wala naman, binura eh.
Opo, Ma'am Binura po, nag-start na po kayo mag-lesson.
Ay, sige. Hindi naman talaga pwedeng dyan agad kung wala pa yung lesson. Kailangan yung lesson muna. Ano ba yan? Sorry ha. Hindi ko naalala na yung section ninyo ay yun nga pala, holiday ba yun? Wednesday? Kaya wala tayong pasok.
Maulan po, ma'am.
Suspended. Hindi pa tayo nag-Canva? Wala pa ba?
Wala
O
pa po.
nag-intro na tayo? Hindi pa lang tayo, wala pa lang tayo sa linear programming?
Wala pa po, ma'am.
O wala pa talaga lahat?
Wala pa po lahat,
Umpisa
ma'am.
ulit muna.
Nag-discuss pa lang po ng grading.
I have presentations in Canva. Hindi pa ba tayo tapos doon?
Wala pa po.
O sagot kayo kasi hindi ko naintindihan. Do we have?
Wala pa po, ma'am.
Wala pa po.
Canva?
Orientation po, ma'am. Tapos po nag-suspend. Tapos po ngayon po ulit yung klase.
So ask ko lang kung wala pa tayong discussion kahit ano?
Yes,
Wala
ma'am.
pa po,
Wala
ma'am.
pa po.
Ano lang ang meron? Ano lang nagawa natin last meeting?
Yung syllabus lang po
Orientation
sa
po.
orientation.
Yes, Miss Lara.
Yung ano lang po, ma'am, orientation po about po sa syllabus. Ayan pa lang po yung nabigay niya sa amin nung last week po. Tapos last week po walang klase.
So wala pa nga talaga. O sige, share screen na ako. So ito wala pa? Hindi pa na-discuss ito?
Hindi pa po.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay lang po, ma'am.
Wrong mistake ang sinasabi. So, again, we shall be starting with Operations Research 1. This is a continuation where we left off last meeting. Sabi niyo, we talked about the course content. So, the agenda today is to go over a little introduction of Operations Research, how we are expected to come up with a specific model for each of the problems we would have, that is starting with the linear programming. Then we would classify models as deterministic, that is deterministic if parameters of the model are known with certainty. But there are models which may also be classified as stochastic or probabilistic.
Then we will start with the first mathematical model. That is the model that most of us definitely or most of you would love. No? The linear program. But walang laman yung three. So operations research is actually defined as the formal study of quantitative. When we say quantitative, it refers to the mathematical models and their implementation or use in managerial decision making. So the origin of operations research dated several years way back, and it has been in use since then. And parang the first use of this has to do with the military operations. That is why yun yung first assignment, no? When we talk of models, I guess everybody knows what model is. Pwede tayong model sa damit, pwede tayong model ng bahay. Ito, puro math, no? Mathematical models, meaning what we can expect to see would be mathematical symbols, mathematical equations, mathematical inequalities. But of course, we would learn, halimbawa in linear programming, ano ba yung pinag-uusapang mathematical na model at ano ang nilalaman ng isang mathematical model. But before we do that, let us take the process of OR modeling. OR modeling would start with the problem definition, that is, acknowledging that a problem exists. Because not unless we define that there is a problem, we would not wish to consider a solution. We would only formulate or come up with the model of the problem. It is because we are able to define the problem. Since operations research is a decision-making subject, it normally would adopt the decision-making process. That is, you would start by observing the system, or sometimes by simply being the first level manager or supervisor, you get to see that something is amiss, something is wrong with the system. And when you try to come up with what is that wrong in the system, then you normally would try to observe the system so that you may identify clearly what the problem really is. So after defining the problem, you normally would gather data. So you would now start formulating the problem. So the problem definition is similar with the problems we have had at the end of the chapters of the books. It was similar to the ones forwarded to you early this afternoon. So coming from the problem in textual form or in paragraph form, if we are able to come up with that problem, then we try to, from the worded problems, come up with a model, which is we try to come up, or we translate text into mathematical equation or inequalities. So what do we expect to see when we say we formulate the model? Mamaya po makikita natin, there are three components, especially for the linear program. Then we try to validate. So what necessitates validating the model? Parang sinasabi niyan, di ba? If you get to see others' mistake, it is quite difficult to see your own mistake. That is, before we get to see our own mistake, most often than not, we see others' mistake. Yung sinasabing, hindi mo nakikita yung sarili mong muta, pero nakikita mo yung muta o mali sa iba. That is why we normally would ask people around us, sometimes experts in the field, colleagues, that may have understanding of the same model we are working with, for them to validate. Why? Because we have to understand if the model has been formulated correctly. So that would pass through what we call validation. And of course, implementation would mean using the model. But again, let me remind you that as employees, sometimes we are commissioned to evaluate problems, no? That is, sometimes we are commissioned to come up with the formulation of the problem and suggest to higher management. But of course, the decision per se would be from higher management. That is, whether our decision would be accorded with go, or whether our decision would be scrapped that would be dependent perhaps on our ability to convince higher management that this is the right thing to do. So as engineers or as IEs, we simply aid or assist in making decisions. Again, katulad ng sinabi ko noon, it is a different story, of course, if you own the business. Because if you are the engineer and you own the business because you are the entrepreneur, then whatever decision you make would definitely be something that may be implemented because you own the business. But at our level, if you are the supervisor, if you are the manager, sometimes we do what we call the roundtable discussion to discuss your findings and for you to be able to convince higher authorities that this is what is best for the organization. And from there, malalaman natin na para makakonvince tayo, sometimes we need that charisma, no? Parating may kasamang ganon. That is why sabi ko nga sa inyo noon, kung nakakarinig ka ng ang tatay, they go on, ano ba yung sabi nila, Friday night. Yung parang getting to know the people, kasama po siya talaga sa trabaho. Wala namang mali if you go once in a while. Huwag lang maging habit na kada Biyernes maglabas-labas, no? Kasama po siya. Kahit makipag-usap kayo sa mga ininyero, ganun talaga yung kung minsan para maintindihan ka ng mga boses at maintindihan mo ang mga boses, then you go out. Wala namang mali doon. So here we have the problem definition, that is a problem is identified. Parameters of the problem are identified. What are the controllable variables? Ibig sabihin, controllable because you may be able to come up with a value. Kaya yun yung gagamitin, let x be equivalent to. So these are your controllable variables, meaning you have access to the data. You may be able to determine what that value would be given that you would subject the same to either the graphical solution or the simplex solution or some other mathematical solutions. But of course, when we talk of the problem, there is what we call the objectives. There are targets. There is something that you wish you would attain at the conclusion of this. Now, the definition of the objectives or the goals, it normally, again, would redound to maximization of benefits as against minimization of cost. One would redound to the other. Practical restrictions, the third one, deals with the limits of the problems. That is, no matter how wealthy the organization may be, or no matter how wealthy the industry you are working with, there would always be limits to the resources. Again, it goes back, or we dwell on the limits that may be associated with man, materials, machine, minute, methodology, and all other M's. Kasi po, halimbawa, sinabi natin, we would wish to produce product X at any amount. That is not possible kasi may limit ka naman sa tao, may limit ka sa facility, may limit ka sa fund, may limit ka sa resources. That is why meron tayong planner, making sure that we have all that is needed when we start producing. So hindi mo pwedeng sabing kaya mong gumawa ng kahit ilan na gugustuhin. Plus, ang isang practical restriction doon. Supposing you are able to produce thousands of units per one production cycle. Now the question is, mabibenta mo ba siya? Or yung mapoproduce mo, i-stock mo lang siya sa bodega? So imagine if you produce and you produce and you produce and you are not able to sell and to sell and to sell, what would happen to the products? It would simply sit on the shelves in your warehouse. And when we allow these units to be seated at our shelves in the warehouse, it is incurring what we call inventory cost. Capital is tied up sa mga bagay na hindi mo mabibenta sa stocks. But of course, we also consider stocks for several reasons. So hindi po pwedeng you produce and you produce and you produce. We consider practical restrictions of the problem. Then from this definition of the decision variables, the definition of the objective, and when we try to lay down practical restrictions, we now examine or we now subject this model into evaluation. Isolve mo siya, then you try to examine alternatives from the solution per se. In linear programs, parang sinasabi mo dyan, alternatives are the combinations, for instance, of two products you wish to produce at the same time. So, inaalam mo parang what options are open to you as a decision maker. So, these are alternatives. But of course, a separate theory, the decision theory, may be discussed under OR2. Then, solution is implemented, again, subject to approval of higher management. So, ito na yung model. Model in operations research is an abstract representation of the problem scenario. Unlike yung model house, nakikita mo at nakahawakan mo. No? Unlike yung model ng mga damit, kikita mo siya, hinahangaan mo siya. Ang ganda ng damit sa kanya. Ang mathematical model, abstract. Para bang, o pwede mo naman siya makita kasi pwede mong isulat. Pero the full understanding, bakit siya model, parang ang hirap isipin kasi nga abstract. Yung kahulugan, matalinhaga. Para ginagamit kasi para maintindihan mo paano isolve ang problem. Kaya siya sinasabing an abstract representation of the problem situation. Okay, next. Ito na yung kaninang uumpisahan pa lang. Decision variables, objective, and constraints. These are similar to the previous slide we talked about. Decision variable would be represented again either by X and Y, A and B, X1, X2, Y1, Y2. It does not matter. For as long as you understand that these decision variables represent the unknown of the problem. And when we say the unknown of the problem, these are variables we would like to have answers with. Kung ginamit mo si X and Y at nag-aral ka pa lang ng high school, hinahanap mo na si X and Y. Nasa koleyo ka na, hinahanap mo pa rin si X and Y. So normally, the decision variables are introduced by the word let. Parang yung kanina sinulat na natin. Let X be equivalent to hectares of land on which to plant rice. Let Y be equivalent to hectares of land on which to plant corn. Bakit importante yung hectares dun sa decision variables? Because when you arrive now at your decision, lalabas dun halimbawa, X is 1,000. So the question of 1,000, anong 1,000? So you go back now to the definition of your decision variables. Sasabihin mo 1,000 hectares. Kung wala yung hectares, iba kasi halimbawa square meter, cubic meter, magkaiba sila. Ito very definite, hektarya ng lupa. Ano ba yung hektarya, ma'am? Gaano ba kalawak yun? Di ba 1 hectare is 10,000, if I'm not mistaken? Square meter? O pakicheck na, sigurado naman may mga internet kayo. I think 1 hectare is 10,000 square meters. So, ganun karami no, ang tataniman. So, yun yung decision variables, X and Y. Ang purpose ng X and Y is because we would be using the x-axis and the y-axis in the Cartesian plane. But of course, pwede mo naman palitan ng A and B. O di yung x gawin mong A, yung y gawin mong B. O kung gusto mo R tsaka C, o di yung x gawin mo R para sa rice, yung Y gawin mong C para sa corn. Basta lang naintindihan mo siya at mai-interpret mo siya, it does not matter. So, after the definition of the decision variables, we now go into the definition of objectives. Yung objective, in most of the cases, ay maximize profit or minimize cost. Ano yung gusto mong ma-achieve? So, pasabi, dalawa lang. You look into the system. Halimbawa, you wanted to change the system and you would like to come up with a model that would represent something that is wrong in the system. E di, ang objective mo doon, kasi gusto mo, ma-reduce ang cost. At pag na-reduce ang cost, ang ibig sabihin kasi, hindi na madadagdagan ang kita. Kaya parati lang siya doon umiikot. Ito yung sinabi din kanina, the definition of the restrictions base sa resources ng company. Doon lang yan nagbabase sa mga MM. Ito yung kanina, validation. It answers the question, does the model accurately represent the real problem situation? That is, if you ask your friend or if you ask your colleague to validate your model, it is because you believe in him or you believe in her. You wouldn't ask a person to validate your model if you know he is not the right person. Kasi baka mamaya, imbis na nakatulong siya sa'yo, ginulo ka lang niya. So we would seek advice usually from the experts of the field. Yung alam natin na nakakaintindi talaga siya sa pag-formulate ng model. Ito na. After validating implementation, hindi siya agad implement. Meron siyang steps. We sell the model. Yun ang unang-una. That is why for most of you who have convinced yourself, oh, I am taking an engineering course. It is because I love numbers more than I love words. Diba ganun naman talaga? Hindi din po pwedeng you are a technical person but you cannot express yourself well and that you cannot send the message across. Very important would be your convincing power. And the only way you may sound convincing is when you can send the message across and when you can send the message across correctly. Kasi kung sabi mo, ma'am, ayoko nga ng communications, mahina nga ako. Sabi mo lang yun. Kasi yun, napag-aaralan naman yun. No? Kung mahiyain ka, napag-aaralan din how to overcome. Kaya yung there are subjects no, sa atin kahit sa IE, which would ask you to do presentation or to report. Huwag kayong magalit doon. Kasi practice yun. Iniisip, pwede naman ng teacher, nakaupo. Ako nagsalita dito, ako pa nagtrabaho. Alam nyo ba, that is your chance to showcase what you know. That is your chance to prove to yourself that you have what it takes to present. After all, when you become managers someday somehow, hindi mo maiwasan mag-present. Pwede bang iwas ka na lang lagi? O ikaw ang line leader, kada may presentation, sabihin mo, wag na ako, next time na lang ako. Wag na ako, next time na lang ako. Perhaps you can do that once or twice or thrice, but you cannot do that for a lifetime. And for as long as you would like to function as an engineer, what is expected of you is that you'll do the presentation once in a while. So yung mga subjects, kung saan ka pinagpe-present, you must be happy about it, showcasing what you know, and making use of what you have. Pag-practicean mo, di ba? Sometimes when we prepare for presentations, di ba, harap pa tayo sa may salamin, salita tayo ng salita ng Ingles. No, nothing is wrong. O pwede naman, you speak before your younger sister or your younger brother and you try to get feedback. How am I sounding? Sabi, Palagay ko may mali sa sinasabi mo sa English kasi ang sakit sa tenga. Di ba sometimes we hear people say that. Oh, walang masama kasi nagpa-practice ka. You practice, you read several times, you present before a mirror or before your friend or before your younger brother or sister. For as long as you still have the time to practice, do that. So that when you do the presentation, you may be able to sell the model. Pag hindi ka po marunong sa presentation, ako my difficulty has to do with the use of technology for presentation. Kasi hindi naman talaga ako nasanay sa ganyan kasi matanda na ako. But your case, ang babata pa ninyo, alam nyo lahat yan. At alam ko na kayang-kaya nyo yan. If and when you are able to sell the model, that is, you convinced higher management that this is it, this is something that would help the organization, then we would make use of the model on a dry run. May trial run, especially if it would mean changes, halimbawa in production setup. If it would mean modifications of some of the procedures, naka-trial run muna, hindi pa yan full-blown. No? So matapos yung trial run, o matapos gamitin, then that's the time we would decide, no, for good, whether it is a go or a no-go. Intindihan po ba? So may tanong po ba kayo? Walang tanong. Ikabasahin ko muna yung mga nasa chat box. Oo nga, nag-declare ng suspension. Okay. Dali lang, daming messages. Would you like to temporarily remove? Ang dami kasing messages. Ano kaya yung messages? Yung cellphone ko pang basa lang to ng messages galing sa Dean's office. At yung mga, kasi baka ang dami. Ha? Ang daming messages. Sunod, sandali lang ha. Ang dami ng messages nito. Executive assistant. Oh. Ano? Executive assistant. Ay, sinama siya. Mamaya na ako basahin yung napakadaming messages. Should you wish to ask anything, pwede po kayong mag-raise ng hand. No? So ito na po yung mga ine-expect nating mathematical models which would cover both OR1 and OR2. Meron po diyang mga models na hindi na siya ngayon sakop ng operations research, pero napunta na siya sa kurso na I do not know if it is production production planning or production management. Yung inventory po, nasa production na siya. Tsaka yung mga forecasting, no? Nandun na siya. So yung blue, we do have two kinds of models, the deterministic and the stochastic. So pag deterministic po, blue. Pag sinabi pong deterministic, we are able to define parameters of the problem. Kaya deterministic. Ibig sabihin, halimbawa, nagpo-produce ka ng laptop, yung restriction mo, alam mo kung ano siya specifically. Kaya siya deterministic. Pag stochastic po, stochastic is another term for probabilistic. So, ibig pong sabihin, meron diyang random variable. So, ang ine-expect mong mga value would be probabilities or probability expressed as relative frequency. No? So, makikita niyo po yun sa karamihan yung tinutumbok ng color orange na link. Bawa, inventory models 2. Ang inventory model 1 po kasi deterministic. Tatlo lamang ang model doon. No? Economic order, quantity, production model, and the back order. Meron ka na agad lahat ng data. Pag sinabi mo naman na inventory models 2, bakit siya stochastic? Kasi nagdi-define yun, halimbawa, may inventaryo ka at ang gusto mong i-define yung level na, makasasagot ka sa need ng client. So, dinidefine doon, gusto mo okay ba sa'yo ang 90% level or 95% or 90%? Kaya po siya stochastic. Another po ng stochastic model would be some queuing problems. Queue, yung study of lines. No? Then another PERT, answering the probability of project completion. Yung probability concepts and probability densities, hindi na po yan kino-cover. But perhaps na-cover siya under any of your lower year math subjects. No? Kasi halimbawa, when you discuss, I think when you discuss, ano ba yan? Advanced math, kailangan maintindihan mo, no? Yung mga probability concepts or probability densities, baka na-touch, I do not know exactly kasi hindi ko siya tinuturo. So, meron tayong probabilistic, meron tayong deterministic. So, ito siya. Pag meron isa, maraming random variables, stochastic siya. Pag zero variable, deterministic siya. Pag deterministic siya, predictable siya. Pag stochastic siya, ang pwede mo lamang sagutin ay probability na mag-occur siya o chance of an event occurring, kaya random. So, ito na po tayo sa first mathematical model, the linear program. Again, we try to define linear program as making schedules using the linear relationships of the variables involved. Linear, pwede kang makakita ng equation halimbawa na x plus y is 21. 2x plus 3y is 36. No? Linear siya. Wala kang exponent sa variable. Kasi pag nilagay mo na 2x plus 3 cubed is equivalent to 32, hindi na po siya papasok sa linear program. So linear program is a mathematical method for solving a large class of special problems. Napakaraming applications. At napakasarap aralin. Kaya nga favorite yan. Ito yung some of the applications. What specific industry problems may be answered through the use of a linear program. Product mix is an example. That is, if the company is engaged in the manufacture of 2 or more products and they manufacture all at the same time, ibig sabihin, these products may be using common facilities. common manpower, perhaps common machines. So your answer is what possible combinations of the products we would be producing would allow us to maximize profit or to minimize cost. So for instance, dalawa lang. Kung ang produkto mo ay damit, mga pantalon at blouse, dalawang klase siya. Magkaiba yung procedure ng pagtahi ng pantalon sa pagtahi ng mga blouses. Iba ang materials para sa pantalon at iba ang materials para sa blouses. So you have two different scenarios producing, although may similar na mga method, then you ask the question, what is that mix? How many of the pants and how many of the blouses we have to produce in one production cycle? And normally restriction may have to do with your raw materials, sometimes funds, sometimes machines, sometimes methodology, sometimes manpower. So you can come up with a model where your objective is to minimize or maximize benefit, minimize cost or maximize benefits, and your problem has to do with product mix. The diet problem is a special problem for special persons in need. May specific restrictions. Halimbawa, sa akin, I am diabetic and I am taking maintenance medicine for high blood. So if I am to consider coming up with a diet that would be to my advantage considering my illnesses, then I would subject myself to a special diet program, which may be answered by coming up with an LP formulation specifically answering my needs. Now, there are, I guess I've heard some schools for the younger ones, the preschool, there are schools which would consider nutritionists to come up with specific diet programs so that the requirement for nutrients, for carbohydrates, for instance, or for proteins may be given to all the children, considering some other restrictions that might affect their performance or their growing up. May mga school po na gano'n. Meron silang kasama ang pagkain. In Japan, libre ang pagkain. So, ibig sabihin, they come up with a diet program. Why do we have to solve a diet problem? What would be the objective? The objective usually has to do with minimizing cost without having to sacrifice nutritional requirements of the person who would take it. Sa Pilipinas, hindi pa tayo kayang makipaglaban sa ibang bansa katulad ng Japan. Sa Japan kasi provided ang meals for free dun sa mga maliliit na bata. Now, wala pa tayo doon, but during my younger years, nakasubok ako ng Nutriban. Given yun for free. Nutriban. But in Japan, yung mga younger ones, kasama doon ang fruits, vegetables, soup, rice, yung ulam, tapos may kasama pa siyang milk. Yung milk nila yung single serve. So imagine mo yun. But what is good about them, sila mismo ang nagsiserve sa sarili nila. At ito ay mga grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. O diba ang galing? Wala pa po tayo doon. Sana dumating tayo na kaya na ng gobyerno i-provide din sa atin. Katulad ng But nakapunta rin ako sa isang klase, may high school na siguro sila. Parang arts class. Sa kanila naman, ang nakita ko, merienda. Hindi pa nag-uumpisa yung klase, may merienda na. O di ba ang galing? Meron din silang self-serve na milk. Tapos ang dami nilang mga nakapack na kung ano man yan. Wala pa po tayo doon. Blending problems has to do with making use of, for instance, two substances for you to be able to form one substance. Of all these applications in linear programming, it is only in the blending problem that you would say you can make use of equality. Halimbawa kasi nag-form ka ng new substance at yung pinoform mo sa new substance ay galing sa dalawang substances, di halimbawa X and Y, and you are forming a new substance coming from the X and Y, hindi mo pwedeng sabing X plus Y is less than 1. Doon, di syempre, X plus Y is 1. Hindi kasi pwedeng kulang, hindi rin pwedeng sobra. So, dyan makikita mo yun. Equal to. Halos dyan lang siya makikita. So, blending problems, and when you try to concoct two or more substances, the objective is to minimize costs, and you wish to come up with a new substance. Possible yun. Nung nakita ko sa libro, coin. No? Coming up with new coins. Parang lately sa Pilipinas, di ba ba yung mga bago tayong coins? I love the 20 peso coin. In fact, pag nakikita ko siya, tinatago ko siya kasi nagagandahan ako. Sabi nila, magkakaroon daw ng 1,000 peso coin. Nakakatakot naman yung 1,000 peso coin. Pag nahulog mo siya, wala na yung 1,000. Then we have advertising or promotion planning. Usually the objective here is to reach as many target clients as possible. Restrictions, normally, the greater chunk of the restriction here has to do with funds. Now, yung airtime minute, halimbawa, when you try to advertise your product, definitely you are considering what advertising media I would use. That is, you come up with, would it be sufficient to only consider leaflets or sometimes brochures or sometimes blue sheets of papers? Or are we supposed to make use of TV time or radio time? But of course, the amount required to consider, for instance, a minute of airtime, baka yung 100,000 mo, 1 minuto lang. So depending on the budget, usually the objective is to reach to as many target clients as possible. Ano ba yung mga narinig natin? I have heard from somebody that there are companies who are allotting, in fact, 20 millions per year for advertising. Pero meron din daw mga company na kuripot. Huwag na natin sabihin kung sino sila. Sabi ko, what? 20 millions for advertising? Meaning, if you are allotting 20 millions for advertising and considering your production cost per month, if advertising would mean 20 millions, siguro production cost is 100 millions. So it is a question of how much do you make per month to be able to cover expenditures that has to do with advertising. Normally, we put money into advertising if we are not happy about the results of our sales in the market. Sometimes there are companies who are considering the use of securing contracts with, alam natin, TV personalities. But if it does not give positive results, usually you shift to other way of advertising the product. So kung imagine mo kung kaya magbayad niya ng 20 millions per year sa advertising, magkano kinikita niya per year? Namamangha nga ako, narinig ko na ang mga players pala, no? Sa players na nakikilaro, halimbawa sa basketball, sometimes they are paid more than 1 million per month kasi ang contract. 15 millions per year. So that is more than 1 million per month. Diba ang galing? So for any company to consider how much to invest in advertising so that their product may be advertised, they can look into the use of the linear program. Another application of linear programming has to do with investment planning. It is like asking if the company has 50 million idle funds. You do not wish to keep your 50 millions in banks. Kasi ang tubo lang dyan, 1%, 2% per year. O di, when most company would want very high ROR, hindi mo yan patulugin sa bangko. Similar to if you have, for instance, 100,000 today, how would you go about investing your money? That is, sabi mo, I would like to multiply my money. Then you try to figure out how many investment portfolios do we have in the market. Then you try to evaluate, for instance, you are able to tap 3 investment portfolios. It's a question now of how much of my money should be placed in investment portfolio A, investment portfolio B, and investment portfolio C, all at the same time. The objective is to maximize yield at the end of the investment period. LP din ang pwede mong gamitin. Galing, di ba? Very powerful. Production or inventory planning, quite similar to the product mix problem. That is when you try to produce, the objective is to cut down on cost or you would wish to make money. Inventory planning, the essence, bakit ba tinitignan natin ang inventory plan? Bakit ba inaaral siya? One, because inventory, when we talk of inventory, we talk about expenditures associated with the capital that goes into the product which we keep in inventory. And how do we deal with clients requiring an inventory of our items? Yun po yun. Then we also have optimal cargo shipment. I do not know if you have heard what we call the backpack problem. So the optimal cargo shipment problem is similar to the backpack problem. Optimal cargo, when your business or when your company is into logistics, into transportation. That is, if for instance, your business is retail, and you are making use of vans or closed vans to transport your items, usually po ang ginagamit talaga mga clothes kasi delikado talaga mag-transport tapos biglang umulan. So usually closed. Now, you try to determine how many units of item A may be carried by the van. At the same time, carrying some other units. And these units or these products may have different dimensions, different packing materials. So it is a question now, how many of A, of B, and C can be mixed all together if they are to be placed in a cargo vessel for shipment. Similar to the study of the backpack problem, that is, I guess everybody knows what backpack is. Backpack has limited carrying capacity. So for you to be able to determine what unit of items you wish to bring with you carrying the backpack, you may consider. So that can be answered using linear programs. But the backpack problem or the optimal cargo problem may also be solved using another mathematical model, the dynamic programming. So ganun ka-powerful ang mga mathematical models. So ito sample lang, nandito rin naman yung sagot para masundan nyo. So tignan lang natin. Sue's crackpot battery is a one-person operation headed by Sue. Sue set up. Sue is manufacturing small items of handcrafted pottery. So she designed 2 products, a pot and an ashtray. Ang hirap basahin pag lahat. Pot is turned on a pottery wheel which she rents from a local cooperative. And ashtray must be made entirely by hand. Sue estimates that in the upcoming week, the pottery will be available a maximum of 30 machine hours. So yun yung limits na time para sa paggamit ng isang makina. And the time she'll have to spend working in her business is limited to 50 labor hours. So sabi mo, ba't may limit yung labor hours? Just like you and me, we can always set time for everything. Kahit naman si Sue, may 24 hours a day. So that you just have to compute 24 hours times 7. We cannot work 24 hours a day. So sa kanya, ang gusto lang niya, mag-work siya ng 50 hours sa isang linggo. So 50 hours would mean 10 working hours per day. So if you have 5 days, if Sue would be working, for instance, Monday to Friday, that would be 50 working hours. But posibleng hindi na niya kinumpute ang kanyang break time. It takes her 1 1/4 hours to make a pot. It is 5/4 of an hour to make a pot and 2 hours to make an ashtray. So meron siya diyang profit sa pot na $5 at sa ashtray 12. On the basis of past demand, Sue projects sales of ashtrays to be a maximum of 15 while sales of pots are not restricted. So ito usually ang tinatanong natin, paano niya nalaman na may maximum na 15 o dapat ang i-produce niya maximum sa ashtray 15 lang. Tignan niyo yung sinabi niya dyan. Sue projects sales of ashtrays kasi na-project niya on the basis of past demand. Ibig sabihin, if you would start your business and you do not know yet how many you can produce, or you do not know yet how many of what you produce you can sell to the market, dun siguro you can come up with a rough estimate. But as the operation would continue and you have data, no, to consider, halimbawa, nasa 1 taon na ng operation si Sue. At sa loob ng 1 taon, hindi pa siya nakapagbenta ng higit sa 5 ashtray, then ang sinasabi niyan is, bakit ka magpo-produce ng higit sa 15? Kaya maximum of 15. Or maximum of 15 may also be taken as the mean value. Yung average ng nabenta niya halimbawa sa loob ng 1 linggo. So either way, one may be able to determine coming from the records of sales of the past. So usually, ang tawag natin doon, the historical data. Sabi niya rin dito, sales of pots are not restricted. Bakit sales of pots are not restricted? Meron bang ganun? Ang ibig niya lang dyan sabihin, in the past weeks that she operates the business, lahat ng binuo niyang pots na benta niya. That is why sinabi niya dyan, sales of pots are not restricted. Now, yung restriction ng sales ng pots, nakabase lamang sa ibang restriction, but as to sales, hindi siya restricted. So the question here is, determine how many units of each product she should make in the upcoming week. So, pareho sana ng gagawin natin kanina. Ito na po siya. So, the definition of the decision variables, again, we have let. Dito ang ginamit, X1 is the number of pots to make this week. Para yan kay Sue. X2 is the number of ashtrays to make this week. Take note of the word number. Pwede rin niyang palitan ng units kasi applicable siya sa pots. So, hindi ka pwedeng gumamit dyan ng word na hindi magdi-describe ng maayos sa pots at ashtrays. So, pag sinabi mo, X1 is pot, no? The number of pots, X2 is number of ashtrays. It is because you are expecting numbers for X1 and X2. Halimbawa, sinabi dyan na 12.31. Di babalik ka. Anong ibig sabihin ng 12.31? Decision. X1 is 12.31. Ang ibig sabihin, sa 1 linggo, dapat si Sue ay makapag-produce ng 12.31 pots. At kung ilan ang nakalagay sa X2. Yung sinabi ko, hindi yun ang sagot, ha? Hypothetical lang. Kunwari lang, para lang ma-determine. Z here would represent the dollars of profit per week. Makikita nyo mamaya dyan sa assumption, meron dyan nakalagay additivity, etc. Now, for the actually, yung formulation mula yan sa taas, ba't nandiyan siya sa gitna? The objective of the problem now is 5x plus 12y, which is considered as the dollar of profit per week. So, titignan mo, yung halimbawa, nakaproduce ka ng 10 pot, tapos 10 rin na ashtray. Yan, sinasabi mo dyan, ang total profit mo ay magiging 5 times 10, which is equivalent to 50, plus 12 times 10, which is equivalent to 120. So, ang total niyan, 170. No? Kaya, yung value ng x, x1 at x2, yun yung hinahanap mo para mahanap mo yung maximized value ng z. Subject to, machine hours, yung nirent niya sa cooperative. Diba? Ibig sabihin, yung nirent niya sa cooperative, pwede mo lang niyang gamitin ng 30 oras. Take a look at the less than sign. Bakit less than? Kasi yung makina, pwede mong, halimbawa, no? 5/4 x1. If x1 is 10 there, so magiging 5 times 10 divided by 4, and it must be a value less than 30. So kung x1, kung isimplify mo yan, x1, ang i-consider mo muna equal to, x1 is equivalent to 30 times 4/5. Kuha nyo? Pag sinimplify mo yan, number 1, hindi mo muna kukunin yung inequality, equation muna. So that is x1 is equivalent to 30 times 4/5. So that is 30 times 4 is 120 divided by 5. 24 ata, yun, di ko sure. Parang gano'n, ano? So, yan po siya sa equation. Equation lang ang ginagamit pagka sinod. Anong ibig sabihin ng less than? If you have machine to work with, and the maximum time you will be working with the machine is 30, then you can make use of that machine for 30 hours, for 28 hours, for 25 hours, for 0 hour, or 5 hours. But you can never go beyond 30 hours. Kasi ibang istorya na yon. Kung ito kasi ni-rent niya, so ibig sabihin, ang binayaran niya for 30 hours lang. Pwede niyang gamitin maximum of 30 hours. Pwede niyang gamitin kulang sa 30 hours. Pero hindi niya pwedeng gamitin higit sa 30 hours. Bakit? Kasi ibang istorya na yon. Pag ginamit mo ng matagal, o di magbabayad ka ng panibago, hindi na yan mag-a-apply sa problem niya. Let us go over the labor hours. 5/4 x1 plus 2 x2 is less than or equivalent to 50. Remember, the problem is a one-man operation. Sisu lang. So yung 50 hours niya, that is the total hours she may devote producing pots combined with producing ashtray. So sabi mo, bakit po 5/4 din ang x1? Kanina sabi, 5/4 din yung makina. Bakit 5/4? Kasi mangangailangan si Sue ng 5/4 na oras para gamitin yung makina. Yun yung sa number 1. Pero pag ginawa niya yung pot, kahit may makina, meron pa ding oras niya. Kuha? Hindi naman gagana lang yung makina na pinagana mo lang yung makina. Kasi ano siya, base sa description kanina, I think it's a pottery wheel. Asan ba? Oh, the plant pot is turned on a pottery wheel. So, ibig pong sabihin, para gumana yung pottery wheel, kung nakapunta na ata kayo sa bandang Bigan ba yan, may mga ganyan. May pottery wheel, pero may tao din na nagtatrabaho sa pottery wheel. That is why doon sa labor hours, meron din tayong 5/4. Now, producing ashtrays represented by x2, mangangailangan siya ng 2 hours. Ibig sabihin ng 2x2, depende sa x2 o depende sa ashtray na mapuproduce mo, ang kailangan mong manpower hour is 2 multiplied by that x2. When you combine the labor hours for producing pots and producing ashtray, it must never go beyond the available man hours or sus man hours or labor hours. Kasi yun lang yung time. Now, the definition of sales as a restriction, X2, sa ashtray yun, ano? Yung X2. Yung sinabi kanina, parang sales of ashtray is limited is to a maximum of 15. So yan po siya. Now, other than the X1 and the X2 na may mga right-hand side values, we also have X1 having right-hand side value of 0 and X2 having right-hand side value of 0. So these are called non-negativity restrictions. Bakit non-negativity restrictions? Because when we are producing, there would be possibility that we would not be able to produce anything. So when Sue is producing, there is a possibility that Sue might not be able to produce pack. And Sue might not be able to produce ashtray. But it is unlikely that the value for X1 and X2 would be negative. Nagpo-produce siya eh. Di ang posible, wala. Pwedeng isa or any positive value. Pero hindi po pwedeng nag-negative ang produce. So these are called the non-negativity restrictions. So may tanong po ba? Yan po yung mathematical model ng problem ni Sue. May tanong po ba? Okay, wala na. Parang pa tayong problem. Pero kunin muna natin yung assumptions underlying a linear program. In linear program, we assume additivity. No? Ano yung additivity? Kanina nakita natin that we have considered SUS2 products, pot and ashtrays. The contribution to profit of the pot when combined with the contribution to profit of the ashtray will give us the total profit so may expect to generate. Kaya additivity siya. No? Linearity. Lahat po ng variables, ang exponent 1, linear. Kasi pag nag-squared ka na, magiging curve na siya. No? Divisibility. In linear programming, we accept decimal values. No? Yung 12.31, 12 units, and 31% of the 13th unit. Kung ayaw ng 12.31 na value, o tinatawag natin, LP accepts or is able to produce non-integer values. But again, just like what I've said in the introduction, if for instance you are commissioned to come up with an evaluation of the problem and you arrive at the non-integer values pero ayaw ng boss mo kasi hindi siya makarelate, pwede ka naman pong mag-integer programming. But as far as linear program is concerned, no, decimal values are acceptable or non-integer values are acceptable. We go to the second example. Nancy and Bob run a small shop operation in which they manufacture 2 products using 2 machines. Each product must be processed first through machine A and then machine B. Product 1 requires 2 hours per unit on machine A and 1.5 hours units on machine B. Product X, or product 2 requires an hour per unit and 1.8 hours per unit on machines A and B, respectively. Per unit profit on products 1 and 2 is 25 and 40 respectively. The capacity of machine A is 30 hours per week and machine B is available for 45 hours per week. We are asked to analyze the situation of Nancy and Bob's operation. Ito na siya. So for the definition of the decision variables, we would have let X1 is the number of units of product 1 to make per week. Actually, pwede namang units lang o kaya number lang. O number of units of product 2 to make per week. So we maximize Z. Ano ba yan? May kulang ba? Dapat yan 25x plus 40y. Ay, may error. Sandali. It should be 25x plus 40y. Wala ba siyang annotation? Paano ko i-correct? Yan, napunta na doon. So, dapat ito ay this is yan pag dito. That is 25x plus 40y kasi natabunan na. Then we have 2x1 plus x2 is less than or equivalent to 30. That would define the capacity of machine A that is expressed in hours per week. Then we have 3 halves x1 plus 1.8 x2 is less than or equivalent to 45. That is the capacity of machine B that is expressed in hours per week. And we have the non-negativity restriction, x1 is greater than or equivalent to 0, and x2 greater than or equivalent to 0. So, susundan mo lang naman siya. Pwede ko namang isend yung ba't ayaw na matanggal. So, references na yung nasa end. Ayaw gumalaw. Ay. Stop share ko, ibabalik ko lang. Ito na siya. So, references, we have Anderson and Libano, Quantitative Management, Boston, Massachusetts, Kent Publishing Company. Any question now? May tanong po ba? Oh, it's 7:36. Gusto niyo na ba na mag-solve na tayo, no? Or pagod na? Oh, sagot po kayo. Huwag mahiya magsabi. Kaya pa? Sino ba ang focal person nyo? Focal person nyo, dapat siya yung nagpa-follow up sa akin kung anong kailangan ninyo. Mama, hindi pa po kayo na-upload, ganoon. So, pwede ba magsabi ng focal person? Meron na ba kayo? Wala pa kayong focal person? Pwede bang may mag-volunteer? Focal person? Yung focal person, kailangan laging may load. Kasi usually yun ang mga nagte-text, yun ang nagme-message, yun ang nagpa-follow up. At saka laging nagbabasa o nagtitingin sa cellphone. Kasi kung hindi nagtitingin sa cellphone, baka mamaya na-send na dapat hindi pa niya alam. Ang dami na namang message.
Sige ma'am, ako na lang po. Since loaded na rin po si Lara ng mga subjects namin na iba. Siya na rin po kasi yung representative ng iba. Yes ma'am.
Nakita ko yung score mo nag-improve siya. So, binalikan mo? Sa COE?
Saan po ma'am?
Binalikan mo yun ano?
Yes ma'am, hindi ko kasi alam na meron palang second ano yun. Second attempt.
The first time I've seen the scores, ni-record ko na lahat. Because I was surprised to have seen, ba't nabago lahat? Sabi ko, kasi pwede raw palang second time.
Yes ma'am, doon ko lang din na ano ma'am.
Hindi rin yun, kasi pampataas ng grade.
Yes ma'am.
Basta lang pwede, wala namang Saya po tayo. Saan po kaya kami? Nawala na daw ang technology. Ano? Okay, designation. So, Rojas na, no, ang focal person natin.
Yeah.
Oh, approve na yung teaching load nyo, sir. So, may tanong po.
So far clear naman po lahat, ma'am.
So, gusto nyo po ba magtuloy na tayo? Total, nandiyan na yung mga problems o sa next meeting na lang? Or, ay ma'am, pag-practicean muna namin yung dalawang problem. Tapos, ilan ba kayo rito sa class? 60 ba kayo? 52? Partner. O sige, ganito. Huwag muna yung mahahaba, yung puro mahaba kasi to. Yung 1, 2, 3, okay lang naman siya kasi madadali lang siya. Kaya kung madali yung 3. O sige, ganito na lang. Practice pa to, wala pang hindi nyo pa siya isa-submit, no? Pero ipapares-pares ko kayo para pag-practicean at you give me the feedback. Next meeting, nahirapan ako ma'am sa ganito. Hindi ko po naintindihan yung gano'n, So, partner ha? Okay lang kayo sa gano'n?
Yes, ma'am. Ay, ma'am, other are suggesting po, kasi po yung iba may shift na po ngayon.
What do you mean my shift?
Like, may work po sila.
What time?
Yes po.
Pwede na umuwi pag may work. So, hindi na tayo
Kung if ever daw po, if ma-move na daw po ng maaga or makapag-deal na daw po ng specific earlier time po sa next meeting natin, we can work out daw po.
Anong gusto nyong time? Pwede time 5? O 5:30?
First two po na problems, ma'am. Okay po.
O kaya anong oras niyo gusto mag-meet tayo next time? 5? Kayo na lang mag-usap-usap, Rojas?
Yes, ma'am. We'll talk about
Pero,
NGC na lang po.
Pwede
Pero
naman-
which, ma'am, yung anong time po yung prepare nyo, ma'am? Para po masali rin po namin sa choices.
Kahit ano, okay lang naman ako. Ang gusto ko lang makauwi before 8. Pwedeng
Ah.
4:30 pag mag-start. Usually 1.5 to 2 hours lang tayo. 1.5.
Okay, ma'am.
Kasi yung mga assignments, yung asynchronous o kung may pasasagutan ng mga problems. So, pwede tayong 4:30, pwedeng 5, pwedeng 5:30. Kung ayaw talaga, pwede naman na 6. Wala naman akong magawa doon. Ha?
Okay po. Noted on that, ma'am. Thank you po.
Ganito lang. Sige, humanap na lang kayo ng partner nyo. Basta may partner kayo. Tapos kasi hindi nyo alam, anong problems gusto nyo? 1, 2, and 3 or 2 and 3 lang?
Ma'am, 2 and 3 lang po.
Okay, 2 and 3. So kahit alin sa 2, kung anong gusto nyong isolve, 2 at 3, huwag lang kayo lahat isang klase, isa lang problem sinolve, no? So dapat, magkakaiba kayo ng sinolve. Pero hanap kayo ng partner nyo, hindi nyo alam kung sino ang tatawagin po next meeting, ha? Pag-practicean, pwede yun? Sagot na.
Noted on that, ma'am. Thank you po.
Okay. Bukas muna ng camera. Rojas, ikaw na kaya mag-picture para isend mo rin sa group GC, ha?
Okay po, ma'am.
Magbubukas ka.
Pwede rin po ba isama yung 1?
Anong one?
Yung
Hindi,
po sa...
lahat ng slides, pipicturean. Bukas na tayo ng camera eh. 1 minuto lang naman yung kayo magbabawas ng Nandito ako sa Arteo pa. Ba't nakasara? Okay yan. Smile na tayo. Sino to? Ella. Ibarra. Bukas na ng camera. Ella. Siguro nasa opisina to si Ella. Sige, picture ka na. Sabihin mo lang Rojas. Ella, bukas na ng camera.
First style.
Ma'am, wait lang po. Kakabit ko lang po yung ko po, ma'am, webcam po.
Second tile po.
Si Malyanta, kagigising lang.
Third tile po.
O kaya huwag kayo magsusuot ng sando, ha? Bawal sando dito.
All good, ma'am. Okay na po.
Okay.
I'm sorry po, ma'am.
Okay lang. Si Ruben, Joy. Tatlo atang slides to kasi 60.
Yes,
Mga
ma'am.
50 plus, no?
Okay.
Okay na?
Yan na ma'am, tapos na po.
Okay, thank you very much everybody. O,
Thank you,
ulit,
ma'am.
ulit sa instruction natin. Teka, tignan ko kung ilan. Hindi po pwede tatlo, dalawa-dalawa lang.
Pwede mamili na lang sa 1 to 3.
Oh, sige, pwede. Kung anong gusto nyo, pwede. Basta
May multo dyan,
solve
ma'am.
kayo. O yung form, medyo mahirap pag na yung 4. No? Pili kayo kahit one. Isa lang sa solve nyo ha. Itatry nyo isa lang. At partner pa kayo doon. So wala nang dahilan para hindi makagawa ha. Oh, yun ang gagawin niyo sa naubos na titira nating oras. Tapos tatawag ako ng halimbawa isang grupo na mag-present ng 1, pangalawang grupo mag-present ng 2, pangatlong grupo mag-present ng 3. Pero syempre, hindi mo kasi alam kung sinong tatawagin. So better to play safe. Kailangan mag-solve. Kasi baka sabihin, pwede naman hindi tayo mag-solve kasi hindi naman tayo tatawagin. Remember, naka-rubrics ito. Pag pinag-present kayo at wala kayong na-present, ang nakalagay doon, score nyo 0. O, di ba may ganun tayong present sa syllabus, ng rubrics. So, gagawa na lang ha, para hindi naman kayo masisiro. So, may tanong pa ba?